Denmark's history as a unified kingdom began in the 8th century, with early references to the Danes dating back to 500 AD in writings by Jordanus and Procopius. By around 960 AD, with the Christianization of the Danes, a monarchy was in place, with King Frederick X tracing his lineage to Viking kings Gorm the Old and Harald Bluetooth. Denmark's strategic location between the North and Baltic Seas influenced its history, particularly in conflicts with Sweden over Skanlandine and with Germany over Schleswig and Holstein. Over time, Denmark lost these territories, including the cession of Norway in 1814 and later Schleswig-Holstein to Germany. In the 20th century, Denmark retained Greenland and the Faroe Islands, while Iceland gained independence. After Nazi occupation during World War II, Denmark was liberated by Allied forces and became a NATO founding member in 1949. Scandinavia has a rich prehistory, with human habitation beginning around 12,000 years ago after the last ice age. During the Ice Age, most of the region was covered by glaciers, except for southwestern Denmark. As the ice retreated, reindeer, elk, and early hunter-gatherer tribes such as the Arenberg and Swiderian people began to settle. The geography was very different, with lower sea levels and land connections to Great Britain and the European mainland. As the climate warmed, rivers shaped the land, and forests and wildlife gradually emerged. The first permanent settlers in Denmark were the Maglemosian people, who lived in seasonal camps and exploited local resources. By 6000 BC, Denmark's landscape began to resemble its present form. Denmark's unique conditions have allowed for the preservation of a rich archaeological record. Early prehistoric cultures include the Maglemosian, Kongomose, Ertebol, and Funnelbeaker cultures, which span from 9500 BC to 2800 BC. The land shifted from tundra to forests, with the introduction of new species like boar, red deer, and roe deer. By 8300 BC, temperatures rose significantly, and the landscape became dense with forests, while new animals, such as aurochs and elk, arrived. The Kolbjørn man, a bog body dating to around 8000 BC, is the oldest human remains found in Denmark. Burial sites like Bogabakken provide evidence of the hardships faced by hunter-gatherers, with a small, scattered population surviving primarily through hunting and gathering. As temperatures continued to rise, sea levels also rose, splitting Denmark into islands by 4500 BC. The population adapted by shifting to a seafood-based diet. Around 4000 BC, agricultural settlers arrived, marking the start of the Neolithic Funnelbeaker culture. This era saw the construction of dolmens and passage graves. Around 1500 BC, the Nordic Bronze Age began, characterized by burial mounds and the emergence of social stratification, with evidence of gold, bronze, and religious artifacts. During the pre-Roman Iron Age, 4th to 1st century BC, Denmark and southern Scandinavia experienced cooler and wetter climates, which limited agriculture and prompted local groups to migrate south into Germania. This period also saw the development of iron extraction from peat bogs, with strong Celtic cultural influences in Denmark and northwest Europe, reflected in older place names. Though the Roman Empire's borders did not reach Denmark, trade relations with Roman provinces are evidenced by Roman coins found in Denmark. The earliest known runic inscriptions date to around 200 AD. By the last century BC, the depletion of cultivated land in Denmark contributed to increased migrations and conflicts between Teutonic tribes and Roman settlements in Gaul. Some Danish warrior aristocrats are believed to have served in the Roman army. Animal and human sacrifices were occasionally made, with bodies often immersed in bogs, leading to well-preserved bog bodies like the Tollen man and the Graubal man, which provide insight into the religion and culture of the time. From the 5th to the 7th century, northern Europe saw mass migrations, marking the Germanic Iron Age. The Viking Age, beginning in the 9th century, marks the end of Denmark's prehistoric period. Danish Vikings, known for their shipbuilding and navigation skills, explored and settled in Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland, likely Newfoundland, and raided and conquered parts of France, the British Isles, and other regions. They established the Danelaw in England, where Danish law and rule prevailed. Vikings also traded extensively, linking Greenland to Constantinople via Russian rivers. In the early 9th century, Denmark's King Gudfred interacted with Charlemagne's empire. By the mid-10th century, King Harald Bluetooth unified Denmark and officially Christianized the kingdom. Denmark expanded under Harald, and after his death, his son Sweyn Forkbeard briefly conquered England. However, Denmark's control over England faded after Sweyn's death, and his son, Cnut the Great, struggled to maintain the union. Christianity played a central role in consolidating royal power, especially under Harald Bluetooth and his successors. After a period of disarray, Sweyn Estridsson stabilized Denmark in the 11th century. Valdemar the Great, 1131–82, further strengthened Denmark, leading to the foundation of Copenhagen and expansion in the Baltic region. The kingdom's influence grew through military campaigns, but by the early 13th century, Denmark faced setbacks, losing territories like Mecklenburg and Pomerania after the Battle of Bornhoved, 1227. Valdemar II's reign in the early 1200s saw a series of crusades and the establishment of Danish Estonia, but his defeats led to the loss of northern German territories. Valdemar's focus shifted to domestic reforms, including the introduction of a feudal system and the codification of laws, such as the Jyske Lov, Code of Jutland, which became Denmark's legal foundation. By the late 13th century, royal power weakened, leading to the first Danish constitution and the rise of noble families. Denmark faced external pressures from the Hanseatic League and the Counts of Holstein, further reducing royal control. Despite these challenges, the Middle Ages saw Denmark's economy flourish, particularly through herring trade, but later struggles weakened the kingdom. During the troubled reign of Christopher II, 1319–1332, much of Denmark was seized by provincial counts following numerous peasant revolts and conflicts with the church. Skane was taken by Sweden, and after Christopher's death, Denmark remained without a king for 8 years, governed instead by the counts. In 1340, after the assassination of one of the counts, Gerhard III of Holstein-Rendsburg, Christopher's son, Valdemar, was made king. Over time, he successfully regained the lost territories, completing this task by 1360. The Black Death, which struck Denmark during this period, also helped Valdemar's efforts. Following his consolidation of power, Valdemar sought to expand Denmark, coming into conflict with the Hanseatic League. His conquest of Gotland angered the League, which lost its key trading town of Visby. The Hanseatic League, allied with Sweden, initially failed to stop Denmark when Danish forces captured a large Hanseatic fleet and ransomed it for a hefty sum. However, a revolt by the Jutland nobles against heavy war taxes weakened Valdemar's position, and by 1370 he was forced into exile. For several years, the Hanseatic League controlled the fortresses on the Sound, the strait between Skane and Zealand. Margaret I, Valdemar Atterdag's daughter, married Hakon I of Norway to unite the three kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. After her son Olaf II's death in 1387, Margaret ruled all three kingdoms until her death in 1412, forming the Kalmar Union in 1397. Her successor, Eric of Pomerania, lacked her political skill, and his foreign policy led to conflicts with the Holstein counts and Lübeck. A trade embargo imposed by the Hanseatic League led to a Swedish revolt, and by 1439, Eric was deposed by the three kingdoms. Eric's nephew, Christopher of Bavaria, briefly reunified the kingdoms, 1442–1448. However, the Swedish nobility grew dissatisfied with Danish rule, and by the reign of Christian I, 1450–1481, tensions escalated into several wars between Denmark and Sweden. Christian II, 1513 to 1523, known for his ruthless political maneuvers, attempted to reinforce the union by conquering Sweden and executing Swedish leaders in the 1520 Stockholm bloodbath. This event ended any remaining hopes of Scandinavian unity. After Sweden's final departure from the Kalmar Union in 1521, Denmark and Norway entered a period of civil war and the Protestant Reformation. Once the conflict settled, Denmark and Norway existed as a personal union under one monarch, with separate laws and institutions, but shared a common king. This union lasted until 1814. The Danish Reformation, which began in the mid-1520s, was influenced by the ideas of Martin Luther. Danes sought access to the Bible in their language, leading to the Danish translation of the New Testament in 1524. Lutheran ideas spread quickly, notably through Hans Tausen, a monk who embraced Luther's teachings and preached openly, gaining followers and support from the king. Frederick I. As Lutheranism gained traction, tensions with Catholic authorities escalated, especially in Copenhagen, where Lutheran mobs attacked Catholic churches in 1531. The Reformation was fueled by widespread dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church, especially over tithes and fees. King Frederick supported the closure of Franciscan monasteries, which led to mob actions against Catholic institutions. Upon Frederick's death in 1533, a civil war, the Count's feud, broke out between Catholic and Protestant factions. After defeating the Catholic forces, Christian III ascended to the throne in 1536, making Denmark officially Lutheran by decree. The Lutheran Church was established as the state religion, and Catholic lands were seized by the Crown. By 1537, Lutheran reforms were fully institutionalized, with a new church structure, and Catholic bishops were imprisoned unless they converted. Denmark became part of the Lutheran heartland, marking the end of Catholicism's influence in Scandinavia. The 17th century saw Denmark enforce strict Lutheran orthodoxy, punishing those suspected of following other Protestant branches, and Denmark later joined the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side. During the 16th century, the Dano-Norwegian kingdom grew wealthy, largely due to control over the Øresund Strait, which allowed Denmark to tax trade passing through. The trade of Polish grain to Europe expanded significantly, benefiting the Danish economy. The kingdom also gained from skilled refugees during the 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648, modernizing the economy and establishing trade links with the Netherlands. Denmark-Norway was seen as a powerful Lutheran kingdom, and when the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, broke out, King Christian IV intervened to support the Protestant cause. However, Denmark's involvement ended in defeat, with the imperial army occupying Jutland. The resulting Treaty of Lubeck forced Denmark to withdraw from the war, and the king raised the sound tolls, which pushed the Netherlands towards Sweden. In the Torstenson War, 1643 to 1645, Sweden, with Dutch support, invaded Denmark-Norway, resulting in the destruction of much of Denmark's navy. The Second Treaty of Bromsbro, 1645, forced Denmark to cede territories to Sweden and exempt the Netherlands from the sound duty. Despite these setbacks, Christian IV is remembered as one of Denmark's great kings, known for his long reign and numerous building projects, leaving a lasting architectural legacy. His son, Frederick, succeeded him in 1648. In 1657, Denmark-Norway launched a war of revenge against Sweden during the Second Northern War, but it ended in disaster. Denmark's new ally, the Netherlands, remained neutral, and Sweden took advantage of a rare freeze on the belts, allowing Charles X Gustaf of Sweden to invade Zealand across the ice. In the resulting Treaty of Roskilde, Denmark-Norway lost significant territories, including Skane, Halland, Blekinge, and Bornholm, as well as parts of Norway. Sweden also gained control over Holstein-Gottorp, threatening future invasions. However, 3 months later, Charles X Gustav decided to further weaken Denmark and aimed to conquer Copenhagen. Denmark, led by Frederick III, prepared to defend the city. The Dutch, Brandenburg-Prussia, Poland-Lithuania, and the Habsburgs sent forces to support Denmark. In early 1660, Charles X Gustav died, and Sweden made peace with Denmark in the Treaty of Copenhagen, returning some territories but keeping others, such as Skane and Barhusha. The treaty set the current borders between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, with Sweden emerging as the dominant power in Scandinavia. The war's outcome led to the rise of absolutism in Denmark. Frederick III convinced the nobles to relinquish some of their powers and taxes, marking the beginning of centralized royal control. Denmark-Norway sought to recover its lost provinces from Sweden, but despite some initial successes, the War of the 1670s ended in a stalemate. During the Third Northern War, 1700 to 1721, Denmark initially suffered a setback with the unfavorable Peace of Travendal, but after Sweden's defeat by a large alliance, Denmark was no longer threatened. However, the Treaty of Frederiksborg did not return Denmark's lost provinces, and Denmark was forced to return Swedish Pomerania to Sweden. European powers opposed Denmark regaining control of the Sound, ensuring that it remained under international influence. For most of the 18th century, Denmark enjoyed peace, though tensions rose in 1762 when Tsar Peter III of Russia declared war over claims to Schleswig. After his overthrow by Catherine the Great, Denmark secured control of Schleswig-Holstein in exchange for Oldenburg, aligning Denmark's foreign policy with Russia. During this period, Denmark's governance became increasingly centralized under absolute monarchy, with significant bureaucratic control. The Danish Code of 1683 standardized laws, and reforms, such as land taxation, were introduced. The aristocracy's influence waned, and non-noble landlords gained more power. Economically, Denmark remained primarily agricultural, with limited industrial development due to a lack of natural resources. The landlord class controlled most of the land, and a system of adscription was introduced in 1733, turning peasants into serfs. Danish agriculture was inefficient, but by the late 18th century, agricultural reforms and rising prices improved productivity. Denmark's economy grew during the 18th century, driven by expanded agricultural output and successful merchant trading, including new colonies in the Caribbean and North Atlantic. The population also grew, from 600,000 in 1660 to nearly 1 million by 1807. In the late 18th century, Enlightenment ideas gained popularity among Denmark's middle classes, promoting personal liberty and a sense of Danish nationalism. The Danish authorities relaxed strict censorship, and a growing pride in Danish language and culture emerged, marked by a law banning foreigners from holding government positions. Tensions between Danes and Germans, especially at the royal court, increased during this period. In the 1770s, during the reign of Christian VII, the Queen's lover, Johann Friedrich Struensee, rose to power and attempted radical Enlightenment reforms, such as freedom of the press and religion. However, these reforms were met with opposition from landlords and the common people, leading to Struensee's arrest, execution, and a return to conservative rule. By 1784, a group of reformers, including Crown Prince Frederick, later Frederick VI, shifted Denmark towards enlightened despotism. The country introduced liberal reforms such as the abolition of serfdom, free trade, universal education, and agricultural reform, which empowered peasants and weakened absolutism. These changes were gradual, with reform-oriented landowners leading the way, and Denmark's finances remained stable. Danish journalism emerged in the 16th century, with the first newspapers appearing in the 17th century. By the late 18th century, Denmark had one of the first press freedom laws, though it was short-lived, ending in 1799. From 1795 to 1814, the press advocated for social justice and criticized the aristocracy. In 1834, Denmark saw the first liberal newspaper, and by the 1848 revolution, newspapers played a key role in political change. The press flourished in the 19th century, growing in circulation, though censorship returned during the German occupation in World War II. Denmark established several colonies outside Scandinavia from the 17th to the 20th century, including Greenland and Iceland, acquired through its union with Norway. The expansion of overseas trade began under King Christian IV, reigned 1588 to 1648, who pursued mercantilist policies. Denmark's first overseas colony was Tranquebar on India's southern coast, founded in 1620. In the Caribbean, Denmark created colonies on St. Thomas, 1671, St. John, 1718, and purchased St. Croix from France in 1733. Denmark also maintained its Indian colony and several smaller colonies for about 200 years. The Danish East India Company operated from Tranquebar and played a significant role in the tea trade, even surpassing the British East India Company in imports. Denmark's East India Company and other Scandinavian ventures smuggled tea into Britain at a high profit. Additionally, Denmark established colonies and trading posts in West Africa, primarily for the slave trade. The Danish East India Company, along with the Swedish East India Company, ultimately folded during the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars disrupted Denmark's long peace, as Denmark-Norway initially tried to remain neutral. However, Britain, fearing a French alliance, attacked Denmark in 1801 and later bombarded Copenhagen in 1807, capturing the Danish navy. This led to the Gunboat War, which continued until 1814. By 1813, Denmark was financially strained and signed the Treaty of Kiel, ceding Norway to Sweden and losing its claims to Swedish Pomerania. After the Napoleonic Wars, Denmark saw intellectual and cultural growth during the Golden Age, with figures like Hans Christian Andersen, Søren Kierkegaard, and Thorvaldsen gaining international acclaim. Denmark also became a constitutional monarchy in 1849, granting freedoms like press and religion. In response to Schleswig-Holsteinism, the First Schleswig War, 1848–1851, ended with a status quo, but in the Second Schleswig War, 1864, Denmark was defeated by Prussia and Austria, losing Schleswig and Holstein. Industrialization began in the late 19th century, particularly in agriculture, where Denmark became a leading exporter of dairy products. The labor movement gained momentum, with socialists advocating for workers' rights. In 1901, Denmark established a parliamentary system, marking a shift in political power. The Scandinavian Monetary Union was formed in 1873, linking Denmark, Sweden, and later Norway's currencies, but dissolved with the outbreak of World War I in the early 20th century. Denmark saw significant social and political changes, including the expansion of women's rights, with suffrage granted in 1915, and the sale of its Caribbean colonies to the United States. Denmark remained neutral during World War I but suffered economic disruptions due to German submarine warfare and rationing. Following Germany's defeat, Denmark regained northern Schleswig via the 1919 Treaty of Versailles. However, the Easter crisis of 1920 arose when King Christian X dismissed the Prime Minister, leading to a constitutional shift where Danish monarchs stayed out of politics. The Social Democrats, led by Thorvald Stauning, gained prominence in the 1920s and 1930s, laying the foundation for Denmark's welfare state. Despite its neutrality, Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany during World War II. The Danish monarchy remained, and the government initially tried to protect its citizens through compromise, but eventually, a resistance movement emerged. Denmark played a key role in rescuing its Jewish population, and the country was liberated in 1945. Post-war Denmark saw political reforms, including the granting of home rule to the Faroe Islands, 1948, and constitutional changes in 1953. It abandoned neutrality by joining NATO in 1949 and later the European Community in 1973, though Denmark remained cautious in its European commitments. The 21st century brought challenges, including crises such as the SARS outbreak, the 2004 tsunami, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Denmark's political landscape saw shifts, with the Social Democrats forming the government in 2019 under Mette Frederiksen. In 2022, Frederiksen's Social Democrats won the general election, forming a new coalition. In 2023, Queen Margrethe II announced her abdication, and her son Frederik became king.